Epictetus realized that much of our suffering comes from the way we perceive situations, not from the situations themselves, a fact we often overlook. We tend to think that we react automatically to bad or unjust actions by others, as if we are programmed to feel a certain way. However, if it were solely the situation itself causing suffering, without considering how we interpret it, everyone would react the same way in similar situations, which we know is not the case. Therefore, Epictetus, who was born a slave and became one of the greatest Stoic philosophers of his time, taught us that we cannot control what others do, but we can choose how to respond. We have the ability to choose our reactions to each situation in our lives. In the 20th century, cognitive psychology, developed through the work of Aaron Beck and Albert Ellis, adopted this same notion from Epictetus. In this video, we will specifically talk about how we can change the way we interpret and react to what happens to us. This method, inspired by Stoicism, provides support to face life's obstacles and overcome frustrations. It uses practical examples, innovative strategies, and mental tools to assist us in this process. First of all, I want to share something incredible. We've reached 150,000 subscribers on the channel, and reading each of the stories in the comments, we see how the teachings are genuinely making a difference for those who commit and dedicate themselves to practicing Stoicism. Thank you very much for being with us. And, don't break this chain of knowledge, subscribe, like, and send this video in the family group. Now, let's continue. Epictetus teaches us the importance of knowing the difference between having healthy desires and impossible and irrational demands. For example, it's normal not to want to make mistakes at work or to try to avoid them, but it's not realistic to demand perfection from oneself and see any error as a disaster and a sign of complete failure. Similarly, it's natural not to want to be treated unfairly or to be disregarded by others, but to think that this should never happen, or that those who treat us poorly are entirely bad, is not reasonable. It's also normal not to like getting sick, but believing that we should never get sick or not be able to handle the discomfort of a flu, for example, makes you extremely fragile. Having realistic and positive expectations about things and people around us helps us grow and stay motivated. It's important to differentiate between having achievable goals and expecting too much, which isn't realistic. When our goals are realistic, they encourage us to do more and improve. However, when we expect more than is possible, we end up frustrated and disappointed because we are hoping for something that doesn't match reality. Expecting too much can be detrimental to how we feel, affecting our emotional health and can harm our relationships. Instead of wanting everything to be perfect, both in ourselves and others, it's better to accept that mistakes happen and to be flexible. Understanding that everyone has limits and imperfections helps us adjust our expectations to something more realistic, bringing more happiness in the long term and improving how we get along with others. Holding irrational beliefs can indeed lead us to react excessively or with very negative emotions, such as panicking or becoming depressed over workplace mistakes, feeling excessive anger over injustices, or being overly offended when treated differently. This is because such expectations are based on a distorted understanding of the world, contrary to the Stoic wisdom of accepting things as they are. From the Stoic perspective, progress happens through reason. Some might think that being totally rational makes us cold, indifferent, or utterly detached. However, being rational is not about denying our emotions or passions. It's about avoiding harmful or excessive emotions, such as paralyzing fear or uncontrolled anger, while maintaining our capacity to love deeply and feel intensely. Being rational means managing our emotions so that they are balanced and appropriate to the situations, thereby reducing unnecessary suffering and improving our well-being. When we evaluate our development and progress as a society, we find that we have evolved more technologically than in understanding and managing emotions. Nowadays, it's easy to buy a supermodern smartphone using a credit card, which is almost within everyone's reach. However, we haven't learned as much about how to control anger, manage our expectations and desires, or deal with intense feelings and emotions that often control us. There are basically three common approaches to dealing with emotions: using tranquilizers, practicing relaxation exercises, such as breathing techniques, dance, and yoga, and using positive thinking to induce calm by imagining tranquil scenarios or cultivating relaxing thoughts. Tranquilizers and physical exercises may offer immediate relief but generally focus more on the physical and not on the beliefs or thought patterns that really guide our emotions. They can help us escape momentarily, but they rarely cause permanent changes because they do not address the deep-seated negative thoughts, such as those predicting disasters or being overly critical. Seneca, one of the most influential people of his time as a philosopher, politician, and playwright, argued that philosophy has enormous power to help us face life's challenges. Support with a donation or as a member, thought that the way we think and perceive the world through philosophy can strengthen our ability to deal with obstacles and unforeseen events, make a difference placed by fate. To achieve real and lasting improvement in our lives, Seneca suggested that we should refine the way we interpret our experiences, profoundly modifying our beliefs and attitudes. For example, a person might generally like their job but not be satisfied with specific parts of it. Imagine a kindergarten teacher who enjoys teaching children, helping them learn to read, and giving classes, but hates writing daily reports in diaries and preparing performance reports on the students. She enjoys being a teacher, but there are daily obligations she detests and must fulfill. This person has two options: to see herself as a failure because her job requires her to do tasks she dislikes, or to adopt a more positive view, valuing the job as her current source of income, even though she does not like all the tasks she has to perform. This way, the teacher can better manage her time and seek a new profession, or a second source of income, so that she is not so financially dependent on her current job. This change in perspective not only reduces emotional stress but also encourages a more positive and active approach to life and work. When you change how you view a situation, you free yourself from an expected pattern of reaction and can choose how to react. But it all starts with you changing the way you interpret what happens to you. Another example to consider is the case of a woman who divorced her husband due to abusive treatment, lack of respect, serious problems with alcohol and drugs, and his refusal to seek help or treatment. She finds herself struggling with feelings of guilt and remorse, thinking she shouldn't have separated, believing erroneously that she should have stayed, endured the disrespect and humiliation, and helped him out of his troubles. However, it is crucial for her to recognize that her husband's choice not to seek help is his responsibility, not hers. Addiction and substance dependency are sensitive issues, but it is necessary for the person to want to free themselves from the terror and hell of dependence. We cannot control the decisions and actions of others, no matter how much we love and dedicate ourselves. By reassessing the situation and changing her way of thinking, she begins to understand that, despite her good intentions, her husband's decision not to seek help is something she cannot change. This change in perspective helps reduce feelings of guilt and self-judgment, allowing her to move from feelings of depression and despair to sadness and regret. It's essential to recognize that sadness and regret, though painful, are healthier and more manageable emotions than deep depression and despair because they accept the reality of the situation without placing undue blame on oneself. This process of reassessment opens a path to emotional recovery, helping her, over time, to find peace and acceptance about the difficult but necessary decision she made. This example shows the importance of understanding what is and is not within our control, a central idea in Stoic philosophy. Thinking is like having a dialogue with yourself, and you can do this through images, symbols, or other processes that go beyond words. Often, without realizing it, we analyze situations and consider different scenarios in our minds, and when this process happens, we are conversing with ourselves. For example, when we think about seeking a new job, we can motivate ourselves with positive thoughts, such as "I can do this, I have a lot of experience in this role, I can get this position." But we might also consider the possible challenges and rejections. "I don't know if I will pass the interview. Some qualifications they are asking for I don't have, will they accept me? What will they think of me? The last course I took in the field was at least 5 years ago. If there is someone more qualified, I might not be chosen for the position." This internal reflection also allows us to recognize the importance of acting despite fears. "I have nothing to lose. If I am not approved in this selection, there are other positions I can apply for." Staying at home is easier and more comforting, but it brings me more harm. Not acting in this situation could cost more than facing rejection. This process of thinking aligns with Stoic philosophy, which teaches us to focus on what we can control. We cannot change all external circumstances, but we have the ability to adjust our thoughts and the emotions they generate. The ability to change our internal perception in the face of challenges is fundamental in Stoic philosophy, and this occurs when we differentiate between what we can and cannot control. It's important to understand that we can't always change what happens in the world, but we can always change how we see what happens to us, thus changing our way of thinking and reacting. However, it's important to understand that not all negative emotions can or should be eliminated. Fear, for example, has an important biological function, to protect us from real threats. These automatic and instinctive emotional responses are vital for our survival. When we hold irrational beliefs, we can end up reacting in exaggerated ways or with very negative emotions, like panicking or feeling depressed over work mistakes, feeling excessive anger over injustices, or being overly offended when treated differently. This is because these expectations are based on a distorted understanding of the world, contrary to the Stoic wisdom of accepting things as they are. From the Stoic point of view, progress is made through reason. Some might think that being totally rational makes us cold, indifferent, or utterly detached. However, being rational is not about denying our emotions or passions. It's about avoiding harmful or disproportionate emotions, such as paralyzing fear or uncontrolled anger, while maintaining our capacity to love deeply and feel intensely. Being rational means managing our emotions so they are balanced and appropriate to the situations, reducing unnecessary suffering and improving our well-being. One of the central tenets of Stoicism is understanding what is and is not within our control. Excessive worrying about hypothetical situations like a mother fretting over her son's future romantic relationships illustrates how easy it is to get lost in baseless anxieties and assumptions. She might start imagining scenarios where her son, upon starting to date or getting married, could stop visiting her on Sundays, or worse, if his future spouse didn't like her or tried to impede these visits. These questions reflect fears that, although understandable, are based on hypothetical situations that may never occur. As Seneca reminds us, we suffer more in imagination than in reality. This highlights the importance of not letting excessive negative thinking dominate our minds. That is, we need to nip hypothetical thoughts about situations, discussions, betrayals, or any type of drama that our minds often conjure up, in the bud. If you have ever been through a tough situation, you've likely experienced that mental argument, where you rehearse different responses you could give, imagine how you could speak, and plan what to do if the other person responds in a certain way. This constant worrying affects our emotional well-being, making us carry an unnecessary emotional load, having to deal with anger, indignation, and preparing us for attack over something that is only happening in our heads. Indeed, as Seneca said, we are suffering more in imagination than in reality. This can also put unnecessary pressure on relationships with those we love. Instead of focusing on what could go wrong in the future, it's healthier and better to seek a balance between what we feel and what we think. In this way, we can face life's challenges more positively and effectively, maintaining a balanced viewpoint that values the present, without overly worrying about what is to come. Unproductive or irrational thoughts are like chains we create for ourselves, keeping us bound in beliefs that limit our capacity to respond healthily to life's situations. These thought patterns can distort our emotions in ways that do not correspond to reality. For example, if you find your car's tire flat and immediately assume that your neighbor will not lend you a jack without even asking, you are limiting yourself with negative assumptions. These thoughts can lead to stress and frustration for no reason, while a more receptive attitude could resolve the situation simply. It might be that one neighbor refuses to help, but that doesn't mean all will do the same. To think that one person's mean action represents everyone's is to make an unfair generalization. Overgeneralization is a common irrational thought pattern that leads us to believe that a failure or rejection in one area of life means failure in everything. This type of thinking can turn minor setbacks into catastrophes, and it prevents us from viewing the situation objectively. Recognizing and challenging these irrational beliefs allows us to see situations more clearly and respond in a more straightforward manner. Another important example is how culture and personal beliefs have a significant impact on how we perceive parental rejection. In many societies, the idea persists that being rejected by one's parents is devastating and irreversible. However, research shows that not all children who are rejected or harshly criticized by their parents end up suffering emotionally for life. When we maintain irrational beliefs, we can end up reacting in an exaggerated way or with extremely negative emotions, like panicking over workplace mistakes, feeling excessive anger over injustices, or being overly offended when treated differently. This happens because our expectations are based on a distorted understanding of the world, contrary to the Stoic wisdom of accepting things as they are. Albert Ellis, a renowned psychologist, suggests that many negative emotions are caused by our own irrational beliefs. For example, if we are unjustly accused of lying, how much it affects us depends largely on the value we place on others' opinions. If we believe we need everyone's approval, such a false accusation can deeply shake us. However, if we understand that it's possible to be happy without universal approval, the impact of such situations on our emotional state is much less. Erich Fromm, in his book, The Fear of Freedom, discusses how people face a difficult choice: either do what others expect of them, sacrificing what they truly want and feeling sad about it, or do what they desire, but risk not being accepted by others. Changing how we interpret and react to situations, challenging our irrational beliefs, can free us from these mental prisons and allow us to respond in a healthier and more constructive way to life's challenges. All of us, as human beings, have the capacity to reason. However, our ability is subject to many biases, making us vulnerable to believing things without questioning or developing superstitious and sometimes fanatical behaviors. Even though we are aware that some of our behaviors or thoughts harm us, we often persist in maintaining them because of irrational beliefs that are deeply rooted in us. In various relationships, there exists an irrational belief that everyone must act fairly, and when this doesn't happen, they deserve to be judged. This idea often stems from the notion of free will and the tendency to label people as bad without taking into account the limitations of their circumstances or the diversity of values. When we feel emotionally disturbed, we should ask ourselves, is this the only way to view the situation? How true is my perception, and is there a more rational way to understand this? Challenging and changing irrational beliefs is essential to avoid unnecessary frustrations. This may involve trying to understand others' motivations, accepting minor flaws, helping others overcome them, or deciding if serious flaws are reasons enough to end a relationship. Additionally, tolerance and respect for the opinions of others, even when they differ from ours, are fundamental for living in harmony. The human brain does not entirely separate reason and emotion. The cerebral cortex, rational part, and the limbic system, emotional part, are deeply interconnected. Thus, the idea that we can think without feeling is contradicted by what we know about brain function. To face adversities, strategies such as distracting oneself with enjoyable activities, using intentional thinking to imagine less stressful scenarios, or focusing on relaxing thoughts can be useful. It's important to avoid generalizations and expectations that distort reality and not to assume negative intentions behind others' actions. Recognizing that the beliefs of, I must be perfect, others must treat me well, and the world must be easy, are monsters that prevent us from progressing. Emotional literacy, the ability to change ourselves, and the acceptance that others can be wrong without being rejected or despised are important steps for improving interpersonal relationships and resolving conflicts. The ancient Stoic school referred to its teachings as a form of science, but virtue, in reality, is not derived from a ready-made formula, it is an art. The essentials about being virtuous can be passed on, but it requires each individual to commit to improving and learning how to express that virtue through their actions and personal choices. It's up to you, every day, to put it into practice. If you've made it this far, comment, practicing, and from which city you are watching. Let's create the largest Stoic community and spread this knowledge to more places.